Okay, welcome back to the St. Louis County Library History and Genealogy Virtual Expo. It is Saturday, December 5th, and the time is 2 p.m. My name is Scott Hall, manager of the History and Genealogy Department. Thank you for joining us. Ellen Mays will be our Expo Master of Ceremonies. Ellen is a public historian and a reference librarian for the History and Genealogy Department. All sessions of the Expo will be recorded. The recordings will be available on the St. Louis County Library website and on the library's YouTube channel. The Expo sessions recorded on November 5th are now available on the library's website. A link has been posted in the chat, and you will find this afternoon's schedule there as well. This afternoon, we will feature presentations by representatives from 6 organizations. If you have questions for any of the presenters, please type your question in the Q&A or in the chat. Presenters will answer questions at the end of their presentations. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started right away. And so with that, I will turn this over to Ellen.
Hi, thank you, Scott. Welcome everyone to our next session of the History and Genealogy Virtual Expo. Our first speaker today is Peggy Cruz from the Jamestown Association History Committee. Welcome, Peggy.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
Can I share my screen?
Yes, you're very welcome.
Okay. It's not doing it. Okay. Sorry, wait a minute.
That's okay.
Get it down there and say share screen again and try that. Oh, I see, okay. There we go. All right. Okay, I'm talking about the history of Old Jamestown, Missouri, and that's the first thing you got to know is I'm not talking about Jamestown, Virginia. I'm talking about Old Jamestown, Missouri, which is a census-designated place in unincorporated St. Louis County, far north St. Louis County, north of Florissant and Blacklock. And what you see on the screen there is basically a Google map of Old Jamestown, which is goes from the Missouri River, which is, you know, this is where the Missouri River loops over St. Louis area, and then to Coldwater Creek. So I'm gonna, this has got the lines on it better. It's the Missouri River, there's Pelican Island there, and then, it's part of Old Jamestown. And then Newhall's Ferry comes down there, and then Coldwater Creek kind of loops around, up and down and around, and it comes over to 367, and from 367, which is really 67 at that point, that's the other side of Old Jamestown. So it's mostly 63034 zip code. If you have to see that zip code, you're probably in Old Jamestown. This is Lindbergh down here, which is north of Coldwater Creek and places. So I just want to make sure people know what I'm talking about there. Also, some of the, I've just picked out things that interest me and pictures I had and whatever. But also, if you want more information on any of this, this is the book. I compiled this book. It's got about 200 pages of text, content. Old Jamestown Across the Ages, Highlights and Stories of Old Jamestown, Missouri. You can get that. There's a free PDF copy on the Old Jamestown Association website. There's a link to that on the front page, and on the history page, it's available to, I think, for borrowing from the county library. You can buy a copy on Amazon for $15, or you can buy a copy at Palatine Renewal Center, gift store, or historic florist, and they both have those. And all the proceeds go to Old Jamestown Association. Old Jamestown is unincorporated, so Old Jamestown Association takes the place of, it's a residence group for the whole area, and you know, kind of communicates with other areas and shares our information and all of that. And then with St. Louis County, you know, communicates with them. So anyway, my brain just went somewhere else, but that's where we are. The word Jamestown, it actually came from an ad in 1819. This was in the Missouri Gazette. Is that the first newspaper? Missouri Gazette, yes, first newspaper in Missouri, I think. And this is on page 2, but it was this long ad put in by Phineas James. Phineas had come to the Old Jamestown area with his mother, Sarah, and he was one of her 7 children that came. Sarah and 4 of her children got land grants from the Spanish land grants. And then Phineas didn't at the time, but then he owned some of the land in between times. But anyway, he wanted to start a development of like 300 homes, which he thought could rival St. Louis, and this was 1819. And I just love his ad, but it didn't work out. There's a few houses now down Portage Road, which is where the location was, but it didn't work out the way he wanted. He eventually left town. But anyway, this is just the beginning of his ad. Jamestown is situated on a beautiful bluff on the southern bank of the Missouri River, 6 miles above its confluence with the Mississippi. Being situated on a bluff, it has the advantage of a firm rock shore, along which there are a number of the safest harbors for boats that I presume any other town on these waters can boast of. Also, several seats for mills that so large a watercourse can form. Near the public square, there is a cave through which passes a large body of cold, sweet, lucid water, which I think could, without much expense, be raised and conveyed to every part of the town. So he had this all planned out, and like I said, it didn't quite work out the way he wanted. But okay, the word Jamestown came from his last name is James. However, at the time, he was his first wife. He was married to his first wife, who was a granddaughter of Eusebius Hubbard, who also lived in the area. And Eusebius Hubbard actually came from Virginia, and I don't think he was real far away from the original Jamestown. Anyway, but Eusebius had died in 1818, and so this would have been a year after his death. And I can imagine them saying, okay, let's call it Jamestown. You know, he's probably talked about it. This just shows that on the maps, Jamestown was on in 1837 and 1846 maps. This composite one was put together by Lou Pondrum, who did a lot of history research and writing in about our area and Florissant. But anyway, just to show that it was still there at that time. It's right up here. It's referred to as Jamestown. And that was just a piece of it, this whole area. See if this is, I was going to switch subjects to the American Indians who came, would come back and forth down the Mississippi. All right, you see, this is the Missouri River here around Pelican Island. It's only a couple miles over to the Mississippi River around Portage de Sioux. So people, American Indians first, they would come down the Mississippi, and instead of going all the way down to the confluence and coming back, if they're, you know, they would go cut through. They'd portage to Sioux, carry their boats to the Missouri River, and then take it, and could come down some of the paths, eventually roads that went to the city of St. Louis to do their trading and that. Right in here, next to Pelican Island on the left, that was Sarah James Phineas's mother. She had that land grant to start with, and there was a ferry, at least one ferry there that she owned. And then it changed hands several times, and it became Hall's Ferry because there was a guy named, I think, Edward Hall, he got the permission to do a ferry there. I think he paid probably to the landowner. And then eventually it became Music's Ferry because Reuben Music bought the land. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But this is just about the American Indians coming down, and right there, then down on the other side of Sioux Passage Park down in here is it's the other side of Pelican Island. This is Pelican Island I'm pointing to here. It's the Missouri River going by. It's the Car of Commerce chute that goes all the way around Pelican Island and comes to the other side of the river. But there supposedly, and there was archaeological digs in that they truly believe that this was part of the infrastructure, whatever, of the group that was with the Cahokia mounds, that there were actually mounds in this area. There's supposedly 2 on private land but I don't know where they are, but they're not in the park supposedly. So I'm sure they don't want people out there looking for them. There's the other thing about, I'm sorry, I keep flipping it. The other thing about that would be an attractive to the Native Americans or American Indians was the topography of old Jamestown. If you noticed, a lot of it is not really developed. There's subdivisions on the southern part of it, but the north part up by the river is pretty much not developed, and that's because there are sinkholes up there. It's a karst area. There's 4 acres. It's officially a fluorescent karst, and geologists know about this worldwide. All stormwater runoff discharges directly into sinkholes and then to the network of underground water aquifers. And this is what Joe Harrell, the expert on archaeology, said: caves, springs, and sinkholes were often revered in prehistoric times, for they were thought to represent portals to the underworld. So that would have probably pulled in some interest from the Native Americans also. So they were there, and then the settlers came in. And in Florissant, Florissant is south of Coldwater Creek, and it had the French and the Spanish there, and I think they made some land grants. But on the other side of Coldwater Creek, north of there, this was a little bit later than Florissant. It was about 1800, where the Spanish government was trying to get people to come live there, and they gave away things that, from like 340 to 600 acres of land in land grants. So the James family that I mentioned, okay, they were some of the biggest ones. There's a Hodges family that was there. It took us, anyway, it was just serendipitous that we found the connection. But he and his wife were Mayflower descendants. And he was in the Revolutionary War, and I think another one. They moved to Vermont, they moved to Canada. they came down to old Jamestown and got those Spanish land grants. And he and his, I think, 4 sons, and then some of his daughters married people with land grants, so family had huge amounts. But they didn't hang around long. About 1820 or so, they left town, and I think there was a economic downturn and, you know, that kind of thing going on. So they moved on to Greene County, Illinois, and then a couple of counties in Missouri, Boone and forget the other one. So anyway, and then there's the Pattersons, and that's what this is just Lucy Hubbard. It says, no, it's Elisha Patterson, who was a son of John Patterson, who I'll tell you about. But Lucy Hubbard was, like, I think, a granddaughter of Eusebius Hubbard also. Anyway, she's died. This is Coldwater Cemetery. It is on the National Register of Historic Places. It's right now, for quite a few years now, maintained and owned by the Daughters of the American Revolution, and they've done a great job. It's beautiful. It's tucked back up, you know, it's up a road, but you can get there, and it's a really nice place. But there's a lot of Pattersons there. And one reason might be that John Patterson and his first wife, Keziah, had 12 children. And after she died, he married the widow of Joseph Jameson, and she had 12 children coming into the marriage too. And then they had 1 child of their own between the 2 of them. So that's why there's a lot of the Pattersons around. And then a lot of them buried, obviously, in Coldwater Cemetery. His first wife was probably the first person buried here. And then this Eusebius Hubbard was the oldest person born there, buried there. Eusebius was from 1744 to 1818 was his lifespan. So he died in 1818. And John Patterson's first wife was buried in 1809. One of the things, and then it's the Daughters of American Revolution, because there's 3 people buried here that actually were in the American Revolution. And then there's this Reverend John Clark who was there, who was a minister, a Protestant minister. And if you know, before the U.S. took over, the Spanish kind of ran the place, and you had to be Catholic. And all these people were Protestant, pretty much coming, getting these land grants, because they were coming from the East Coast, and they were Scotch, Irish, or British backgrounds. So anyway, but this John Clark, Reverend John Clark, he would come over and do services for them in their homes. And the guy that was, I think it's Trudeau, that was the commandant, and he was supposed to, you know, he kind of liked Clark. So when Clark would come over and Trudeau would know about it, he'd wait 3 days till Clark got back to Illinois, and then he'd send the troops after him. Well, it was too late. But anyway, it's just kind of a fun story that, you know, he was supposedly had the first Protestant services west of the Mississippi, but this was down by Herculaneum when he had a service down there in the river. And then there's, I don't have a picture of it right now, but there's also a farther south, just south of Coldwater Creek on Old Halls Ferry, where this is Old Halls Ferry. Further south there is a new Coldwater burying ground, and that is an African-American cemetery, and it was built by, you know, the money was collected and gotten from former slaves, and they started their own cemetery and school. And the thing with Coldwater Cemetery, it also had a school and a church there. So the church changed denominations several times and then kind of split out to other locations, to different churches. I don't know what 220. And I'm supposed to talk soon. Stop. I will stop shortly. Anyway, this is another just Coldwater Cemetery. This is a house right next to the cemetery. Actually, the builder of this house, the one who had it built, donated the land for the cemetery, and that was Nicholas Blacklock Douglas, who was married to a Patterson. And anyway, he had built the house. It has 12 rooms. Each has a brick fireplace. It was built by slaves. There was a slave quarters. It was 2 different rooms, men and women, and there was this big 36-inch thing down the middle and separate staircases. Anyway, all of that, it's kind of interesting. And then the Douglases had 2 of their children, Mary and Verena, each married Henri Chameau. First Mary, and then she died in childbirth, and then Verena married. And Verena and Henri Chameau are the parents of Adele Starbird. So this was Adele Starbird's grandparents' house. And she is buried, if you remember, she was a columnist for the Post-Dispatch and high up at Washington U. But anyway, she's buried in that Coldwater Cemetery. And that's this, unfortunately, this house, this was the house in the 1900s. This is the house now, pretty much. Anyway, it had a couple fires, and it just really, they couldn't repair it, and took all the bricks off and everything. Let me go. This is down, Sarah James had that ferry, and then more ferries at the end of Newhall's Ferry, right at the river, Missouri River, and the people would come over from from St. Charles County, maybe, bringing their produce or whatever, and then going from there to Florissant or possibly downtown. But they would stop at Music's Ferry, and this Music's Ferry Inn was built about 1860 or so, and then finally got torn down, unfortunately, in 1939. But I mean, it wasn't being used at that point. But anyway, it's a neat place, and people would come because there'd be things like Showboats coming to Music's Fair and hanging out for the summer. And then this is 1932, but they came before that too. So the people from the Showboats, people would come from all over, St. Charles County, St. Louis County, West County, whatever. They would come up, they'd go to the Showboat, and then they'd spend the night at the inn, and then they'd go to the show the next day, because it was a different show. So that was one of the first things I found out about the history there, and it was just sucked me right in. And that was a Showboat. That could have been, 1932, it could have been a speakeasy also, but I can't prove that. This was a 1-room schoolhouse that was built about 1860, and then changed. It was a schoolhouse. It was a public school until about 1950, when Hazelwood School District formed and took over everything. And then this is the same. You can see that this is the schoolhouse here, the main part of this house that's still there. It's a residence right now. And this is the Delos Mansion. A lot of people know about that. Joseph Delos Sr. went to war in France. He helped out in World War I with the artillery in France, and got an award for helping save the town of Uzier. So when he came back, and he's a son of Firmin Delos, and they had lots of money, and he came back and had this house built. It was finished in about 1926. And it's got 10 bedrooms, among other things, and a 4,000-foot underground ballroom, 4 stories. But it's a neat house. But anyway, right now, the Loges had sold it to some people named Krager, and the Kragers sold it to McDonnell Douglas, who was then taken over by Boeing. So Boeing has buildings down there overlooking the river, closer to the river than this one. But I know they have meetings, you know, they bring their people in. They bring people in from all over the world. They're the Boeing employees, so they have anyway. Right now it's tough. But anyway, that's that. Then, like I said, if you're interested in any of this, find my book, you know, online and look at the PDF file, and if you want to buy one, it'd be cheaper than printing it out for sure. These are all books that I found helpful, especially this Captain Edmund Hodges and his descendants. He's the one that they were descendants of the Mayflower. Great book. It's documented so well. This is from Westphalia into the world. That was the Germans that came over, and this was the Rosenketters, and it tells how they came over. Hazelwood School District, that was a great one too. It was written in about 1969, and so thing was the author of that, Greg Francois, was able to talk to people who were in these schools in right around 1900. So because they were still alive in 1969, so he got to interview them. So and he did a lot of good. These 2 on the left are very well documented. The other ones that have little stories in them that may or may not be true. But this one's Patterson Settlement by Hume, type Melvin Meyer, who was a descendant there. And then Passport to Manhood was written by Joseph Delos Jr., son of Joseph Delos Sr. And now I'm way over, so no question. And if you look at the Old Jamestown Association website, at the very bottom, there's an email address and a phone number. Those are mine. They're right under the post office box or whatever. It's my email address and my phone number. So if you have questions, you can ask.
Thanks, Peggy. I did want to ask you, someone did just ask a couple questions. So while you're here, wanted to ask, does the book explain the naming of the streets like Hall's Ferry and Patterson Road?
I think it does. Patterson is the road that comes from like Old Town, Florissant area out to the Patterson, properties. And then Hall's Ferry is, again, there was a guy, when they did the road in 1815 or named it's actually County Road number 1, I think. When it was named, the guy that was running the ferry was Hall, so I don't think he owned the land. I think he just had a lease to do it or something. But anyway, so at that point it was Hall's Ferry that they called it. And that's where that one came from.
Okay, great. And does Coldwater Cemetery have all of the founders and descendants of the people who formed this area in Jamestown?
Not really. The Hodges, they're nowhere to be seen. Pattersons, there's a lot of Pattersons. It's pretty much started out as their family cemetery, I think. And then there's different ones. Actually, the James, I think, are in a different cemetery over on the Spanish Lake side. So, no, it doesn't have everything.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation, and we look forward to looking at your book and reading it more. And thanks again for your time today.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Karen Herrick, and she is representing the Sappington Concord Historical Society.
Hello.
Hello,
Are you ready for me?
Yes, we are. Yep, let me switch it over to your screen. Okay.
Well, hello. I am Karen Hurrick, and I'm representing the Sappington Concord Historical Society today. Our organization has been around for almost 30 years. We share the extraordinary stories of ordinary South County people, like the Jamestown area. Our region is full of caves and springs and sinkholes, and there is evidence of indigenous peoples living here for many, many centuries. Earlier residents often found arrowheads and all sorts of things when they were farming. One of the things that we are strongly trying to do is to research, collect, preserve, educate, and share the history of the Sappington Concord community. The community that we focus on is in unincorporated South St. Louis County. It is roughly within the boundaries of the Lindbergh School District, but also extends into neighboring areas. Our area does not have a lot of incorporated areas of official towns, or at least the ones that have come into existence have only been around in most cases for 50 or 75 years. The time frame that we often look at starts with the arrival of the English-speaking Americans in the early 1800s. During the French and Spanish colonial eras, there were a number of very large land grants, but there's very little evidence of permanent residence by those Europeans at that time. The Sappington family, which was headed by John Sappington and his wife Jemima Fowler Sappington, were living in Kentucky. They were the parents of 18 children, one of whom died in Kentucky. Remarkably, the remaining 17 children all lived to adulthood, all married, and almost all of them had children. And in about 1805, probably the winter of 1805 going into 1806, the legend that has come down is that 40 families left Kentucky and came to South County to establish their farms and plantations. They brought with them not only their lifestyle, but they also brought with them enslaved people who were instrumental in farming and developing these large plantations where grain and all sorts of farm products were grown. And because of the large size of this group, then the Sappington children married into families whose names are recognizable on area street names like Eddy and Park and Wells and Kennerly. Some of the log structures from that era, still survive, including the Joseph Sappington House and the more familiar Thomas Sappington House, which was built of brick and is now open to the public, and that's located on Sappington Road. Things in the area changed significantly in the early 1830s, and that's when the first of many, many German immigrants arrived in the area. They, of course, were vehemently opposed to slavery, and they approached farming in a much different way, a sustainable approach rather than use the land and move on. They purchased parcels of land, often smaller parcels, and began truck farming, which is the growing of vegetables and fruit. They were quite successful at it in many cases. Their produce was often hauled to the markets in St. Louis City, and over time, communities were established, crossroads sort of communities with maybe a general store, a saloon, and usually in some cases a post office. And then as those German immigrants arrived, two significant churches in our community were established, and they are both still thriving. One is St. John's United Church of Christ, which was established in 1838, and the other is Assumption Catholic Parish, which was established in 1839. Both of those congregations have been a very key part of community life for all these generations, and were also instrumental in starting other congregations over the years. And then, of course, over time, as the population increased, there were a variety of other denominations of churches that were established. The other thing that happened when the Germans arrived was there were a couple of other things that happened in partnership with the English-speaking residents that were already established in the area. One was some of the early schools. The forerunners of Concord Elementary School and Sappington Elementary School, which are both part of the Lindbergh School District and both, again, thriving, were established in the early 1800s. A bit later on, Concord Farmers Club was established. It still is surviving. And the farmers clubs were fairly common in the era of farming, and their purpose was to both educate their members about the latest in farming techniques and to provide conversation. In the case of Concord, they had an extensive library, and they were a cooperative for buying seed, but probably the most remembered is the social activities. They were a very important part of community life. Over the decades of the 1800s, immigrants arrived from many homelands, particularly from Europe, including Italy, and they too established farms. And as the population grew, other businesses were established. Few people know this, but there was a brick company on Green Park Road near Tesson Ferry, and then later a small pottery operation that produced clay flower pots. There are quite a number of rock quarries in the area. The only one that still is in operation is Busson Quarry near the Jefferson Barracks Bridge. And there were, of course, roads and various community amenities that were added to the mix over the decades. And by the time World War II era had arrived, that was a turning point. That was the point at which our community went from being exclusively agricultural to being suburban. And there were great changes during that time. Most of the residents of the area up until the World War II era, of course, were farming. But there were also another group of people, a smaller group, but a much wealthier group, the Bush family, the Lemp family, and several other well-to-do family groups from the city of St. Louis built summer homes, and of course the most well-known being Grant's Farm. And they added another layer of interest to our community, although there wasn't a whole lot of interaction between the very wealthy and the average folks, unless the average folks were working for the wealthy folks. Up until World War II, the area was fairly isolated. The farmers did take their produce into the city of St. Louis, but it was very much limited into when other family members might venture very far from home. Of course, the improved roads and all that sort of thing made a big difference. But we've come to a point where all of the farms, for the most part, have been replaced by subdivisions, business complexes, lots of retail, all those kinds of things. And our oldest members of the community are the ones that still remember life that was a very different way when it was still farms. And one of the things that we try to do is to collect the stories, the photos, the memorabilia from those times, earlier times, and from those times of transition. And that has been one of our big projects with our newsletter. We have a quarterly newsletter. I'm one of the editors and one of the feature writers, and it's been a privilege and an honor and a very interesting journey to listen to people's stories. And one of the people that was really key in getting the Sappington Concord Historical Society established and keeping it running for many years was Ross Wagner. Ross was a professional historian, but he most identified as a truck gardener. He taught advanced placement history at Kirkwood High School for many years. He had earned a PhD in history at St. Louis University, and yet at heart he remained a humble farmer. And he was extremely knowledgeable about the genealogies of many of the South County families and kept a card file detailing information about those families, and that file collection has been shared with St. Louis Genealogy. They've scanned those cards and it is in their database, and our society retains the originals. Ross passed away a number of years ago, and upon his death he bequested his house and his barn and his property on Sappington Road near Edian Park. And we have been in process of trying to determine how best to use that gift, and we have done some pretty significant steps towards making full use of it. The house has become a repository for some of our archives, and we did not have our own home, our own location until Ross bequested the house, and the barn and the house have both undergone some repairs to stabilize them and keep them in good condition. We have partnered with Noelle Wagner, and she has grown and gathered her heirloom farm where she grows fruits, vegetables, and flowers on the property and sells them. Grown and Gathered Farms is a nonprofit that we are in partnership with, and the goal of that program is to share information about how our food is grown, about sustainable gardening practices, and encourage community connections. And that's been quite successful, although of course during COVID a lot of our activities have been paused. But that is been a very successful and popular activity. In the barn, Ross had been given a number of some quite unique handmade farming implements that the truck gardeners had adapted and very ingeniously modified to meet their needs for growing specific crops. So at some point in hopefully in the near future, we will be able to display some of those things. And as we move forward, again, we have been collecting all kinds of information. But one of the things we are most proud of came into being almost 20 years ago, and that is our book. This is entitled Sappington Concord in History. Ross Wagner and a team of other members of the society wrote this book. It is over 300 pages. It is packed with photos and information and wonderful stories. We were able to have it reprinted by No Waste Publishing just 2 years ago. And so the reprint copies are currently available at the Loft Gift Shop at Thomas Sappington House, and also at the Lindbergh Schools Administration Building at Gravois and Sappington. So that is something we are incredibly proud of and are happy to be able to have this wonderful way of sharing the story of our area in a very readable and concise way. Again, we have a quarterly newsletter. We normally have quarterly meetings in person. We have gone to virtual meetings. Membership is quite inexpensive, and if you would like to join, we would be more than happy to welcome you into the Sappington Concord Historical Society. So unless you have some questions, I think I have presented my information here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen. I learned a lot and it was great hearing from you today. I don't see any questions yet. I was going to give it a second to see if anyone had any final questions or last questions. Of course, if anyone thinks of any questions later on, I'll definitely pass them along to you.
Great. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Bye now.
Our next presenter is Leslie Richards, who will be presenting for the National Society of Daughters of Colonial Wars, the Missouri Society.
Aha. Just a second. Wow. There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I wasn't sure if we were all set. Had my screen set differently, and when I turned on it, something changed. First, I would like to begin by saying that I was a student of Ross, who we were just talking about, and his name just went out of my head, at Kirkwood High School. He was an excellent history teacher and a very important person in South St. Louis County. I also, my late husband was a direct descendant of John and Jemima Sappington through their son Mark, and his mother, who is also obviously a descendant, is still alive, and one of a number of Sappingtons who are in South County and active in the Daughters of the American Revolution and such. And if you go around St. Louis County and go to functions with name tags, you'll almost always find a Sappington. The family with 17 children, 16 children that had issue. There are lots of Sappingtons, and they're all over the country, but they are still right here in St. Louis County. Anyway, I am Leslie Richards, the current president of the Missouri State Organization of the National Society Daughters of Colonial Wars. I'm also the national parliamentarian and the chairman of the Junior Membership Committee. We meet here in Missouri, usually in Columbia, 4 times per year, although not regularly this calendar year for obvious reasons. Our meetings include the meeting itself, a luncheon, and a program relating to an historical topic of the colonial era, as one might imagine. We in Missouri support a variety of charitable organizations, as does our National Society. This administration, our national president, is raising funds to donate to the restoration of the stained glass windows at the First Parish Church in Plymouth, Massachusetts, in honor of the 400th anniversary of the sailing of the Mayflower. My state project here in Missouri is the Frontier Nursing University in Versailles, Kentucky, and those students are learning midwifery or midwifery, whichever you prefer, as well as other more traditional nursing curricula. Our national meeting is in April in Washington, D.C. It takes place during what's called, it used to be Hereditary Society Week, and now it's really morphed into Hereditary Society Month practically. And we meet normally at the Army-Navy Club, and we have meetings and a luncheon and a program on an appropriate historical topic. We have separate national board meetings then in April and then also in the fall. And you don't, by the way, you don't have to take great notes because everything I'm going to tell you and already have basically is on our website. And that website is www.nsdcw.org for National Society Daughters of Colonial Wars. We are a lineage society which honors our ancestors, participates in charitable activities, and studies American history. We have active members through state societies as well as members at large. Our main goal is to honor and perpetuate the memory and spirit of the men and women who, by their acts and counsel, assisted in the establishment, defense, and preservation of the American colonies. We collect and preserve records of the colonial period and records of service of the men, and I should add women. There are some women who assisted in the establishment, defense, and preservation of the American colonies. We promote historical research and commemorate the events of the American colonial period 1607, which you probably know as the founding of Jamestown, through 1775. Now, the eligibility to join our lineage organization is very easy, much easier for me to just read to you from our bylaws. Eligibility is any woman who is 18 years or older and who is lineally descended in the male or female line from an ancestor who, from the time of the settlement of Jamestown, which was May 13, 1607, to the Battle of Lexington, April 19, 1775. So the ancestor must have participated in some activity, and I'm going to tell you what they are, in that time frame. And here are the qualifying, I always call them jobs. We should call them positions or some other word, but it's easier to say jobs. They must have served as a military or naval officer or as a soldier, sailor, marine, or privateersman under the authority of the colonies, which afterward formed the United States, or in the forces of Great Britain, which participated with those of said colonies in any wars in which the said colonies were engaged or in which their men were enrolled. This organization is a little bit different. Most of them don't specify that the patriot could have been in the forces of Great Britain. It's a little bit different. Other qualifiers are that they served in any civil position of high trust and responsibility in the colonies, such as Director General, Vice Director General, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Deputy Governor, Governor's Assistant, Lord Proprietor, Secretary or Treasurer of a colony or province, member of the King's or Governor's Council or legislative body in the colonies, or commissioners to the United States or New England, or member of the council or body of assistants, as well as Receiver General, Attorney General, Surveyor General, and such titles as Sheriff, Constable, Mayor, Judge, Justice of the Peace, Customs Officer, Master of Ordnance, and other elective or appointed office in the colonies. One of my favorite ones that doesn't happen to be listed in our bylaws is fence viewer. I think that's a fun one, and it just meant that they were responsible for verifying that fences were properly maintained and that the fences properly marked off an individual's own property, legal property. As you can see, there are many ways for a person in today's world to qualify for membership. There are some other groups which qualify on similar criteria. There's one group where they can be an original proprietor who stayed. This one is more, this Daughters of Colonial Wars is definitely patriots who actually served in some of these functions. Now we have two classes of members, as I think I said, active members who joined through a state, and members at large. Members at large have to be a resident of a state in which there is no existing state society. That's not the case in some other groups, but in this one it is. Active members at large are invited to attend our annual assembly, but they cannot hold office or really don't have any standing other than they're welcome to attend and learn about what the society is doing. Let's see, now emerita members, we do have an emerita status for our ladies who age, and you have to be a member for 5 years and be over the age of 90. And then we don't ask that you pay any dues, but you still get they still receive our mailings and our magazine. We publish lineage books, hardbound lineage books. We're very proud of them. And I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember whether we have a set of them in our library, but I've decided that if we don't, I'll make sure we get one. This is volume number 8. And the 3 most recent ones, they're all alike. They are arranged, what they contain is the names of all of the members who have joined in membership number order during the administration which publishes the book. And in addition to Mrs. John Smith and her national number, it gives who her patriot is, and then the first 3 generations, him or her, and their children and grandchildren, so that you can have some way to connect to that line. And it also gives the references where you would find that information. If you were, for instance, doing an application, you have to prove the facts that you say. And with our lineage books, you at least know where to go look. So we publish those not at a regular interval, but I think it's more when we have someone, a committee who's willing to undertake the project, because it's a lot of work, as you can imagine. We've published them at least since 1950. I have some back that far, maybe earlier. We also publish a twice yearly magazine, and I wanted to show you this issue, this summer's issue, and I'm going to put it up close. These are the windows in the first parish church that I spoke of in Plymouth, Massachusetts, that's being fully restored. This church was given to the Society Mayflower descendants, and the current administration and the most recent past one are earning money for the ongoing restoration and maintenance of that church. And Daughters of Colonial Wars committed a certain amount of money toward the restoration of those beautiful windows. It's a beautiful, beautiful church. So we have this very nice magazine twice a year for our members, and it contains information that you would expect in a society. It has a lot of our forms that are needed for various and sundry things to run our business, and articles, new members, that kind of information. And we have we have a directory, which most groups do, which is our membership, our list of officers and whatnot for the present administration. And we do have, as almost all of our groups do, an informational brochure. And we do usually try to keep these in the rack up in the genealogy room at the library, but due to the pandemic, I personally haven't been sending them up there because I know there aren't a lot of people, but once we can go to the library in person, we'll probably be restocking real quickly. But a wonderful thing you can do to learn is to go to our website. Again, it's www.nsdcw.org. And it's got a lot of information that some groups put in their members only, but ours are open to the public. And you can go, there's a tab at the top that says resources. And if you click that, you can see the application. But the reason I wanted to mention it to this group is that you can also access the list of already approved ancestors. And if you find someone who you know or you suspect is your ancestor, you can then go to the top of that page and it says, reach the state presidents. And if you click on Missouri, if you're from Missouri or whatever state, it'll take, in our case, it'll give you a direct email message to me, and I can either answer questions or point you to the right person, or get you in touch with our registrar and that sort of thing. I'm also happy to look up your ancestors in our books and whatever. there's just lots of information on that resource tab. But like I say, one of the main things is that you can reach us through there. Just because your ancestor may not be listed on in that list doesn't mean he or she doesn't qualify you. It just means that no one else has joined on that particular line so far, and they might already be registered and we just haven't updated the website. That's always a possibility. When I was talking about our President General's project, I meant to point out my pin I'm wearing. Our Presidents General normally have something they use for fundraising, and this is our current President General's pin. It's a representation of the Tudor Rose, and she sells these, and the members and anybody who wants one, the Tudor Rose is the symbol of our organization, but it's a pretty piece of jewelry whether you're a member or not. And then all the money that Presidents General pay for the pins or whatever it is themselves, and then all of the money goes to her project. So this is just one of the ways we fundraise in honor of our President General and to further her project. The Tudor Rose, of course, is the symbol of the early English history. Most of you on this program probably already know that. At our 100th anniversary, 75th anniversary a few years ago, we had a similar pin, but it was all bling. It was all rhinestones. It's also very pretty. So a lot of the girls like that sort of thing. Let's see. There is amazing history if we do have a set of our books. Even if you're not interested in joining any of the groups, this is true whether it's Colonial Daughters or DAR or any of the group lineage societies. Even if you're just working on your genealogy, these books are great references, because in most cases, and most of the ones I have owned quite a few of them, you can find out a lot about your ancestor very quickly. And if it's a well-done lineage book, you'll also find out good places to go for the specific documents. We all love Ancestry.com, not all, but a lot of people love Ancestry.com, but if it's not sourced, then you have to go and make sure that the facts are real. And in lineage books to these various lineage societies, you can do that, because in order to get in these publications, someone has had to prove every single date, place, name, marriage, birth, whatever it is, that they have put on their application. So they're really great sources. And our library, we're very fortunate here in the St. Louis area, at least, we're very fortunate to have the large number of references. Especially a lot of my friends say, well, what are you doing in the middle of the country? What do you do for your New England research? Because that's what I do the most of. And I always have to tell people, it doesn't matter. We have great early colonial and especially New England historical references here in our library. So I highly recommend that you become familiar up there if you're not already. So unless anyone has any questions, we do meet quarterly in Columbia, mostly because we're a statewide organization. We only have one organization per state. So we try to meet somewhere that's fairly simple for most everybody to get to. With this last year of inactivity because of the pandemic, we're going to need to have a membership drive here pretty soon, because we need to beef up our membership a little bit. But it's a very pleasant, non-political, lovely society, and we do welcome inquiries, and we look forward to new membership all the time. And when you join, we have lovely insignia, as you can see here. The Tudor Rose plays a part in almost all of our pins. So it's a lovely group, and thank you for letting me tell you about us today.
Thanks, Leslie. We do have a couple of questions. One is, do you have a Sons of the Colonial Wars organization?
Yes, there is, and it's not terribly active here in St. Louis County, but in St. Louis, there is one, and it's called, I believe their name is Sons of Colonial Wars. And I suspect if a person would Google around, they'd find it, but if not, they can contact me and I can put them in touch.
Great, thank you. And are there yearly dues, and is there an application fee?
Yes, and I was thinking I wrote that down. It's not one of the real expensive ones. The annual dues are like $25 for our chapter. I belong to too many things and I can't remember them all. It's very reasonable. I believe that the joining fee is like $100 or less, and that would be for the application. There's no separate genealogist fee or anything like that. And again, if somebody is really interested in joining, wants to know that, I could get them. Sorry, I normally write that down before I do my talk, and I just forgot to do it.
No, that's all right. Thank you very much. I will pass along any further questions we have to you, and thank you again for talking to us today.
Thank you so much.
All right, our next speaker is Margaret Carr, and she was going to be talking on a variety of organizations today. Let me get her set up on the screen for you. There you go.
Okay, I pressed on mute.
Yes, you're fine. You're good to go.
Okay, but can you see me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. All right, I am going to be speaking on several of these hereditary organizations, all but one. First, I'd like to start with the Daughters of 1812, and there is a man's society as well. I'm an honorary state president of this organization. Our purposes in 1812 are to promote patriotism, preserve and increase knowledge of the history of the American people by the preservation of documents and relics, the marking of historic spots, the recording of family histories and traditions, the celebration of patriotic anniversaries, teaching and emphasizing the heroic deeds of the civil, military, and naval life of those who molded this government between the close of the American Revolution and the close of the War of 1812. To urge Congress to compile and publish authentic records of men in civil, military, and naval service from 1784 to 1815 inclusive, and to maintain a national headquarters museum. We have a wonderful museum and buildings on Rhode Island Avenue in Washington, D.C. I belong to the St. Louis Pioneer Chapter, which is located here in St. Louis. There are 4 or 5 others in the state of Missouri. And if you would contact one of us, we could tell you which one would be closest to you. There are application fees and there are dues, but they're pretty minimal as well. There is, as I said, there is a man's organization much smaller, the Sons of the War of 1812. Another organization, of course, a big one, is the Daughters of the American Revolution. The DAR was founded in 1890. We have a huge headquarters in Washington, D.C. By the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, they're looking to have 250,000 active dues-paying members, and they're really working hard to get there. Anyway, there are at least 12 or 13 different chapters in the St. Louis area. And when the lady was talking about Coldwater Cemetery, it is the only cemetery that's owned by, it's the only cemetery owned by the Daughters of American Revolution anywhere in the world. It was gifted to us in about 1966 when we agreed to take that cemetery. It's the Patterson family, on the Patterson family farm. If you were interested in looking for your ancestors In the DAR, you can go to the DAR website and you can type in the name that you're looking for, and it'll come up and you can purchase actually the lineages of those people. And again, just like the previous speaker said, just because you might not find your ancestor doesn't mean it's not real. We're constantly finding new patriots. So for the Daughters of the American Revolution, I belong to the John Sappington DAR, and I'm the honorary regent of that. Currently, the first vice regent. For New England Women, which is a really wonderful organization, this previous speaker, Leslie, has been president general of this. The National Society of New England Women was organized January the 24th, 1895 by Mrs. William Jerry Slade and incorporated in the state of New York, February 20th, 1895. The object of the society is to bring together women of similar background of New England ancestry to engage in charitable, educational, and patriotic work. Women over the age of 18 years with proof of lineal descent from an ancestor born in New England prior to the adoption of the Constitution of the United States in 1789 or before 1700 in Nassau and Suffolk counties, Long Island. In addition to regular members, there's a provision for membership at large, and recognizing the advantage of enrolling younger members, the members established a cradle roll membership for the enrollment of children from birth to 6 years old through 18 years. There is a life membership fee. Of course, as Leslie just said, Leslie Richards, all of these organizations have absolutely beautiful insignia. And ours is, for New England women, many of the states are equally spread on a golden circle: Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Connecticut. So anyone who's in, if you're all of these have websites. This one is www.newenglandwomen.org. You can go to those websites. Someone will answer you, may direct you to one of us, because we live here in the St. Louis area. So I really enjoyed belonging to all of these. Daughters of the Court of Honor is the lineal society as well. And the women who belong to this are descended from the officers of many of the wars. It goes way back, and mine is actually with the Pequot War, one of the original Indian wars that happened. So, and then finally, the Battle of St. Louis, 1780, is one that is very, very important to me. I am a president of the Commemoration Committee, which up until this past May, we've been able to have an actual commemoration of the battle, and the Missouri History Museum has been kind enough to let us host this. Well, because of the pandemic, I don't even know if we're going to be able to have one this coming May. But what we have now in St. Genevieve, Missouri, is going to be an exhibit, which should have opened this past May as well, on all aspects of the Battle of St. Louis. It's an American Revolutionary War battle. It happened May 26, 1780, on what is today the Arch grounds. And it's just fabulous. If you're interested, there is the book called The Battle of St. Louis, The Attack on Cahokia. Two places that same day there was a battle, and we won both. We defeated the British both places. This is by Stephen Kling, Christine Sorensen, and Marissa Lopez. I'm not sure, I think the library has a copy of this, but you can buy this on Amazon. There is a brand new book that will also be available when the exhibit does open. There's a new book also, this one. And I don't know how many people actually have a copy of this yet. This is called The Militiamen of St. Louis and St. Genevieve, and it's a compilation of the original militia lists from the General Archive of the Indies of Seville, Spain. Again, this is again done by Christine Sorensen, Mary Ann Long, and Mary Anthony Long Starts. They are sisters. is unbelievable. This has in Spanish and in English, the military lists. The Daughters of the American Revolution and the Sons of the American Revolution will accept service of the Spanish. They already do accept, obviously, the French help during the Revolution, but they are researching and accepting the service of anyone who had Spanish ancestors who fought and helped the American cause during the American Revolution. So I really, this book has a list that's pretty complete. We can always find more. Christine lives in Spain. She's a member of the España DAR chapter, and she can read both the Old Spanish and the Old French, and she can go into the actual archives, and she can research that way. If anybody has any questions about joining any of these. Now, for the Battle of the St. Louis it's the only one that's not an hereditary organization. We accept anybody as members who are interested in the story. My late husband and I started this. We, as I said, we do have, and I don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic, if we're even going to be able to have our commemoration in May. But hopefully, I believe it's the first weekend of May of 2021, the exhibit is to open in St. Genevieve, Missouri. If any of you have not gone down to St. Genevieve, Missouri, the museum there is really, really nice. So if you have any questions, I know that the people who are running this have my email, and you could ask me about any of these organizations. There's also, just because one lady talked about the Sappington family too, the Sappington Cemetery in Crestwood, we know we now have 15 men who fought in several of the wars there. That's a cemetery for wreaths across America, and we're going to put those wreaths on December 19th on that cemetery. The cemetery is actually run by Crestwood, Missouri, but they let us come in. In fact, they let us in October go in and start planting some tulip bulbs at the graves of the military people there. So we will be putting wreaths on there for Wreaths Across America. As I said, we have local meetings, we have national meetings, and again, I don't know what's going to happen this year. All of these have websites. All of these are welcoming new members. Everything but the Battle of St. Louis, you have to have lineal descent. In other words, it's been proven. If you can find out what your ancestor is, and you can tie in to someone who's already been proven, that makes it a lot easier. In a couple of cases, I've had to start from scratch and prove all the way back. I really miss being able to go into your wonderful library, but that will happen again too. So if anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to ask now or to contact us later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I really enjoyed hearing your talk today. We don't have any questions yet. Of course, I'll pass them along to you if anyone has any later on or thinks of any questions that they'd like to ask you. All right, thanks again.
You're welcome.
Our next presenter is John Graves, who is the governor of the Lewis and Clark Company of the Jamestown Society.
I believe I'm unmuted on visual.
Yes, you
Coming
are.
through, everyone.
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Good afternoon. As was stated, my name is John Graves. I am with the Lewis and Clark Company of the Jamestown Society. The Lewis and Clark Company is the local company or chapter of the Jamestown Society located here in St. Louis. Before I begin my little presentation, what I'd like to do is ask each of you to ask yourselves a question or a series of questions. And I'm going to use my notes so that I don't get off point. Who is your mother and your father? Now, obviously, you know those questions, but explain a little bit about their background. Where were you born? Where did you grow up as a child? Tell me about your hometown, your community, where you lived and attended school as a youngster. The answers to these questions really identify you and become a major part of yourself. Well, so too is it with America. Many lineage societies focus on the Revolutionary War, which really I kind of describe as a coming of age. It's when America reached its majority and became emancipated from England, was able to determine its own future. So too was it with America, but really where America was born was Jamestown. The Civil War, some lineage societies focus on the Civil War, which was kind of like a trial divorce that didn't go so well, but we reconciled. And so that is another event in history that many people tied themselves to. Now, the English made several attempts to settle North America. There was a Roanoke colony in 1585 under a charter granted to Sir Walter Raleigh by Queen Elizabeth I. The inhabitants of that colony disappeared and became the lost colony of Roanoke. There was another colony that was attempted to be settled. That was the Popham colony in 1607 under a charter granted to the Virginia Company of Plymouth by King James I. That colony was abandoned after 1 year. Then we have the Jamestown colony in 1607 as well, under a charter granted by King James to the Virginia Company of London, and the Jamestown colony survived. Because it survived, it was and is the first permanent English settlement in North America. It is the birthplace of America, and that's really what makes Jamestown special and sets it apart. The Jamestown Society, of which I'm a member, is focused on the pre-1700 history of Virginia and its inhabitants. Our society is actively engaged in colonial history by funding various projects designed to preserve and reveal our early history. If you've ever visited Jamestown, you'll know there's a lot of archaeological digs going on there. Our society helps fund those digs. To date, they have recovered over 1 million artifacts, some Indian, some English, some imported items that came from as far away as China that were brought to the colonies. And it's all housed in a museum right there on Jamestown Island. If you've not been to Jamestown and the neighboring town of Williamsburg, I would encourage you to do that. As a matter of fact, it's a great history lesson. If you've got children or grandchildren who are young teens, it's a wonderful place for them to learn the beginnings of America. It's like taking them to your hometown, showing them where you used to live when you were a child. So we're very actively engaged in updating and maintaining records. We're involved in the archaeological digs through funding them. We also help restore buildings that date back to colonial days. And we also sponsor and fund the creation and the writing of books that chronicle our history. Now, how does one become a member of the Jamestown Society? If you're interested, you have to show you're descended from a qualifying ancestor. Well, what is a qualifying ancestor? A qualifying ancestor would be someone who may have been a stockholder in the London Company or the Virginia Company, or a member of one of the guilds which invested in the above companies during the active investment period. Also, it would be an individual who owned land on Jamestown Island or lived on the island prior to 1700. Owning land and living in a neighboring area or neighboring county does not in itself qualify an individual. That person who is a qualifying ancestor was also a resident of Virginia in the time of the 1624-25 muster. You can look that up and Google that. It's very interesting to see the muster of all the people that lived in Jamestown at that time. Or it might be a person who served as a governor, secretary of state, treasurer, attorney general, clerk of the general court, member of the council, or House of Burgesses prior to 1700. These persons shall be conclusively presumed to have had their domiciles in Jamestown, on Jamestown Island during the terms of their office. Or lastly, I shouldn't say lastly, but also if you are descended from a minister of the Anglican Church, which is the Church of England prior to 1700, that too can qualify you for membership in the society. Now, lastly, if you descend from a person who was an official Indian interpreter in Virginia prior to 1700. So the successful applicant must show proof that he or she is descended from such a qualifying ancestor. A list of these qualifying ancestors may be found on our website at, and you might want to make note of this, www.jamestown, and that's spelled with an E at the end, www.jamestown.org. My qualifying ancestor I used for membership, as an example, was Captain Thomas Graves. He was a shareholder in the Virginia Company, having bought 2 shares of stock, paying 21 pounds sterling at the time. He came to Virginia aboard the Mary and Margaret, which was known as the Second Supply in 1608, and was a resident of Jamestown. He was also one of the original 20 Burgesses, that's like a representative, first representing Smiles 100, who participated in the first democratically elected legislative session in North America and later represented Accomack County as a Burgess. This event took place, this first meeting of Burgesses took place in Jamestown at the Memorial Church in July of 1619. Now, it used to be difficult, much more difficult to join the Jamestown Society than it is today. And the reason I say difficult is because simply you just have to go back in time that much further. Many people belong to the SAR or the DAR, or Colonial Dames, and those are wonderful organizations. And many people who did the research themselves know that often it was a very difficult task to prove your descendancy to a person who served in the Revolutionary War. But imagine going back to the early 1600s. We're talking about really going back in time almost 200 years, at least 100 years, and sometimes 200 years. And really what you're talking about is maybe 3 to 5, 6 generations further back from the Revolutionary War. And as you know, each time you go back another generation, it gets more and more difficult. Unfortunately, the Civil War saw many courthouses burned, destroyed many, many records. Some records are just in disarray. Now, our society, through one of its funds, actually goes into various courthouses in Virginia and tries to restore records. And if they will allow us, we will even digitize those records, which really makes it wonderful for somebody who's practicing genealogy and tracing their family history, when you can just go online and access the information you need, whether it's marriage bonds or probate records, what have you. Now, I say it's become easier, and the reason it's become easier is what we've done is we've taken all of our members and all of their charts showing how they descend and descend from a qualifying ancestor, and we have linked that to people who were alive during the Revolutionary War. So we have what we call a Revolutionary War era list of persons. They didn't necessarily fight in the war. They didn't necessarily serve in any military capacity, but they were alive during the Revolutionary War period. So if you go to that list on our website, you can look up all the names that are on that list, and I think there's over 1,000. And you can look at the surnames and all of a sudden you recognize names from your family tree. And if you can find someone on that Revolutionary War era list that you're descended from, we will provide all of the information going back to the qualifying ancestor. So all you have to do is prove yourself back to that Revolutionary War era person, and we can supply the rest of it for you, which really makes it a lot easier. What it really means is a lot of people who are members of the DAR, Colonial Dames, or the SAR can easily qualify for membership in the Jamestown Society by virtue of this list. Again, those names and that information may be found on our website at www.jamestownwithane.org. Our society holds national meetings twice a year, usually in Williamsburg, Virginia, which is only about 12 miles away from Jamestown Island. And our national office is located in Richmond, Virginia. Our society has local companies. In some organizations, they refer to them as chapters. We call them companies. Missouri, and we have them in most states. Missouri has 3 companies. It has one company in the Kansas Missouri Company in Independence. It has another one in called the Central Missouri Company in Columbia, Missouri. And lastly, the Lewis and Clark Company located in St. Louis, of which I am affiliated. Our local company holds luncheon meetings twice a year in the spring and the fall, and guests are welcome to attend. We're hopeful that maybe we'll be able to meet in the the spring in May, or certainly by next fall, I would anticipate. We also publish a newsletter twice annually, which is available to anybody free of charge if they want information. Now, routinely, I will send out snippets of information on our early colonial history, and I do that not every day, but almost every week. There's a little blurb that comes out that basically says, you know, so many hundreds of years ago on this date, this happened or that happened. And I send this out to hundreds of people. And if you would like to receive information on our early colonial history, I would welcome you to send me an email. Send me your name and just put history in the subject line. Send me an email and I will add you to that distribution list and you will start receiving these. My personal email address is jgraves, Graves 48 @gmail.com. That's jgraves48 @gmail.com. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. If you have any questions, certainly I'll entertain them. You can either ask online here or you can email me.
All right, and we're all set for our next speaker, who is Sharon Michael with the Daughters of Union Veterans of the Civil War. Hello, Sharon.
Hello, can you see me okay?
I can see you and we can hear you as well.
Oh, thank you everybody for being here. I am with the Daughters of Union Veterans of the Civil War. And it was my great-great-grandfather who fought for the Union in Indiana Regiment. The Daughters of Union Veterans was organized on May 30th, 1885 by Olive Howard, Harriet Knapp, Eva Marin, her husband Frank Marin, and Bertha Martin. And Missouri has 5 tents. They're not called chapters or programs, they're called tents. And our tent is the Julia Dent Grant tent, number 16 in St. Louis. and it was chartered on August 22nd, 1930. The Daughters of Union Veterans was the Department of Missouri was organized on August the 9th, 1921. And it's a non-for-profit organization formed for the Daughters of Union Veterans to perpetuate the memory of their ancestral fathers who served in the Civil War, to honor their loyalty, their unselfish sacrifices to preserve the Union and to keep alive the history of those who participated in the struggle. Their direct lineage of the ancestor could be like a daughter, granddaughter, great-granddaughter, and it's 18 years or older, and the eligibility can never be changed. You must furnish complete war records of your ancestor. For example, their pension records and their service records, and those can be done by mail. And if anyone's interested, I can help them with that. We meet once a month, the first Saturday of each month, unless there's a convention or some other type of interference. And with the virus, we're not able to meet in person. So we've been having our meetings with Zoom. And some of the projects that we do is we have genealogy projects, including recording Civil War discharge papers and helping members record their ancestors' war and personal records, and to find out who they fought for, you know, what company, what state. And currently our tent has, I think, 90 members. And we do offer members, even if they're out of state. We have out of state members. And we have historical projects, including we have a beautiful museum and headquarters in Springfield, Illinois, that collects the Civil War artifacts and memories, and it places commemorative plaques and markers of appropriate universities and public buildings and parks and battlefields. And we also have a really nice monument in Jefferson Barracks Cemetery in St. Louis. We have community service projects. Our organization is highly rated for its work at the Veterans Hospital, the Veterans Home throughout the country. And I am a volunteer also at the Missouri Veterans Home in Florissant. And with the virus, I haven't been since February. And I keep in contact with the workers and the other volunteers. And some of our members also work at state homes, nursing homes, children's homes, and many other community groups. And we offer educationally, we maintain college scholarship programs for worthy descendants of Union veterans and present special awards at United States academies, United States Military Service, West Point in New York, and the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, and United States Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. We also offer the cradle roll, and that is for infants till I think it was 9 years old. Excuse me, can't remember. I think it was 5 years old. I'm sorry. Are there any questions I can help? Any questions I can help?
I don't think there are any questions. Thank you, Sharon.
Oh, you're welcome. That was just short, but kind of brief. If anyone has further questions, they can email me at cwancestor@gmail.com. And thank you so much for having me. Sorry it was so very short, but it's sweet.
That's all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I think that was our last speaker. Isn't that right, Ellen? Oh, sorry. Nope, that was not our last speaker. Sorry.
Nope, she was. You're good.
Oh. Okay, sorry, I don't know where I am in the schedule. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions about any of the groups that you would like to ask that you didn't have a chance to ask or just thought about, you know, just let us know, send us an email, and we'll pass that on to the presenters. So this concludes the History and Genealogy Virtual Expo. I think it's been very interesting 2 days. Our first session was Saturday, November 7th, and of course this is our second day of it. So I would like to thank all of our speakers for participating in this event and giving us their time, sharing the information about their organizations. Thank you also very much to everyone who logged in for joining us. We on the History and Genealogy staff wish you all a very happy holiday season, and stay safe out there, and hopefully we'll see you in our department after this is all over with. Thanks.
Thank you.